Same old trouble, villains always knocking at the door. Pretty pictures on the page, but nothing ever stays the same.
Thank you, Vangello, and welcome once again to Graphically Novel. My name is Josh Wasta, a.k.a. Fallout Fury, and with me, especially this time, I'm going to introduce my dame to kill for, my Goldie, the Baronessa, Jennifer Howland. Jennifer, thank you for being with us.
Thank you. And I'm happy to be remotely joining everyone. And it's my distinct pleasure this time around to introduce our colleague, Bear. Thanks for being here, Bear.
Thank you so much. And I have the distinct pleasure of introducing our guest for the first time. Wow, it's a thing I do. I didn't get insulted. I got complimented because, of course, Jen's going to compliment me, but I get to introduce Mr. Matt Hirth, who has been with us for Rhett Conversations, if you're familiar with that. But this is his first time here on Graphically Novel. It's a pleasure to have you with us, Matt.
Thanks, Bear. Glad to talk about comics and movies this time instead of just comics.
Yes, for anyone interested, if you like Matt, check out our House of M episode over at Conversations, where we explain House of M front to back.
And if you don't like Matt, check out our House of M Conversations, where you get to meet Matt. Jesus, come on.
Matt, we went through your background in comics, so I think we're just going to jump into the dirty water that is Sin City and 300. We're going to talk some Frank Miller today.
So much good, yet so much bad.
Yeah.
I'm not even sure how much good is left anymore.
We have dealt with Frank Miller twice before on this show. Once, he wrote the comic that we did for Daredevil, Born Again. And he directed The Spirit, which is one of Bear's favorite movies.
And it's in my top 10.
Okay, well, that's still one of.
Still, yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah. But we watched and reread Sin City and 300. So, Matt, why don't we start with, have you read Sin City and 300 before?
Yes, I read Sin City when I was like 18 or 19 years old, so that's close to 25 years ago now, possibly more. 300 was actually my first read, but I read both of them again within the past month or so to get ready for this. So they're both fresh in my mind.
How about you, Jen?
Sorry, it took me a minute there.
That's okay.
This was the first time reading, obviously not the first time watching. I've actually seen Sin City several times. 300 I've only seen once. So I would have to say that I really like them. I think Frank Miller is one of my more favorite kind of noir-esque authors and directors.
Okay. Bear, how about you?
I actually saw this movie not long after it came out. I didn't see it in a theater, but basically as soon as it hit anything streaming, as soon as it hit, like DVD and stuff like that, I was all over it. I was like, what is this movie? It's lots of fighting, it's lots of action. Of course, it was 15 years ago. I was much younger, much dumber, much, more testosterone driven. I hadn't read any of it except for little spoiler for Inside Workings. Like, we actually had Sin City on the list for what was it, season 2? Season 2, and it got bumped for better and more poignant stuff that was coming out at the time.
Things that were present in the zeitgeist.
Yes, things that were just more interesting in general, and things that we wanted to catch some more viewers with. Also, like, the Sin City is another, like, both of these I thought at the time they came out were great movies. As since then, my opinion has adjusted with time and age and retrospect. I still think both movies are good for what they offer, but we'll get into why they're not so good here in a bit.
Yeah. So I had Sin City is one of the ones that was actually on my shelf, and has been for years. I haven't gone back and revisited it. 300 and Sin City both. I've watched them multiple times. 300 is the first time I read the comic. No big shocker or surprise there. Obviously, the movie stretched it out a bit more because it was only 100 pages, whereas Sin City was 200 pages and only one of four real stories stories that are in the Sin City movie. One of them was a short story.
Actually, the thing that I was surprised about, though, with the 300, having seen the movie when it came out in, what was it, '06?
Yeah.
Watching that movie and going, wow, this is a great action movie, and oh my God, Gerard Butler, and oh my God, Lena, and all, like, all this hype that was around the movie. Now, actually reading the comic 15 years later, I'm actually kind of surprised at how well it was translated nearly directly from the comic to the screen. The text, the imagery, the flat out color and feel of the comic straight to the movie. If people ever have a question about that, about why does this movie have this color and feel that it does, it came straight from the comic that way.
Interesting to also note. Oh, yeah, Jen.
Sorry. I just wanted to point out that Sin City was exactly the same. Sin City, Josh and I talked about it earlier today, but Sin City, they used the comic to storyboard the movie.
Yeah.
I mean, the scenes are almost identical in the movie to the comic.
That was actually kind of a complaint of mine. I got to be honest. Having read it so shortly before I watched it again, I was kind of astonished. Was there a script for the hard goodbye sequence? Because the dialogue was, I would almost say to a word, except for a couple small scenes they cut. It was almost exactly the same word for word, no changes.
Yeah, there were some lines omitted. There was only one noticeable part that I noticed that they changed words because
You're talking about 300 or are you talking about Sin City?
Sin City, because the book has some very homophobic language.
It does.
And some of it was kept in the movie. Not all of it, but some of it was.
Yes, that's true. I was grateful they decided not to keep the second iteration of him referring to his parole officer and in negative terms and how she could have any man and why is she gay, basically, except not as nice. The comic had to do it twice. They cut the second one. I was grateful for that.
And I'm really finding it interesting, Jen, that you were talking about how you really enjoyed it and everything, because as a white man cis white man that's always trying to improve, there was so much that I cringed at that just didn't make me feel good reading or watching the movie, or the movie and the comic, specifically for Sin City. There are parts in 300 where they talk about, those Greek boy lovers. And I was like, no, that's your modern day homophobia translating onto the page, because there was actually nothing wrong with that in Greece or Sparta.
The cultural aspects that happened at the time, that was not even... Right. That wasn't even something that would have been made fun of.
Right. So, but Jen, I do find it interesting, and I wanted to make sure to touch on that. Did you pick up on any of that, or are we more sensitive to it because we all, I think, to a person, liked this when we were younger and not as active or as good of advocates as we are now, if that makes sense. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, I mean, I think that I think that all of the points that you and Matt have made and Bear have been salient completely. And I think that you should feel cringy about them. They are cringy, absolutely. And this is where I find it kind of difficult, because there's, I think that to Matt's point, I did appreciate that they didn't reiterate Marv's feelings or thoughts on his parole officer once he had dated it. I don't think that it lent that much to the story at all. It's difficult because I think that too completely it exists. Homophobia exists. And I don't think that the way that it dealt with in the movie glorified it or made it feel right. Does that make sense? I think it was like, this dude is a psychopath. He is, there is some brain damage there. There's, he's not right. And so his thoughts and opinions are probably not right as well.
And we only need to hear as much of them as we need to hear.
Right. Just to know exactly how gross this guy actually is.
I mean, can I give another take on that really quick? And just to argue a tiny bit? Sin City was marketed, was sold. It's basically a modern noir tale for when it came out. And in all of the classic Humphrey Bogart and everything else noir stories, you get the story of the gorgeous quote unquote dame walking in, and you get the internal monologue of the guy talking about how gorgeous she is and how stunning she is, whatever. This was Frank Miller's take on that. And yes, Marv was damaged, and we're supposed to see that he's damaged. I almost saw that more as an excuse for him to be able to put that kind of talk in, as opposed to making it not okay and the reader should know that it's not okay. Because that wasn't the people who were reading these books when they came out, and probably seeing this movie and loving it when it came out, didn't think in such a way of, oh, he's damaged, so it's not okay that he's saying that, and I know that. It's more, this guy's so dark and gritty and cool because I want to be dark and gritty and cool, and he says that, so that's cool. That's how I would think somebody would take it.
You know, I kind of understand that take. I don't agree with it, but I understand that take.
It's the Rorschach thing from Watchmen.
Yeah, because is exactly the same thing. You know, Rorschach sounds like the hero when you start off, and then you listen to him talk about, you know, how he badmouths liberals and just basically anybody, sex workers, anybody in general, because he's a conservative. Okay, well, that's a take from that person. It's kind of like the same thing with Marv. It's like Marv at the time was just like, I just don't understand. And I can agree with that to a point, because when I was younger, when like at the time this came out, which I didn't read this when it came out, but I can understand it. At the time this came out, I would go, if you're so hot, you could have any dude. Well, if you're that hot, you could also have any chick. Now I understand, you know, you can go for whatever you want. Obviously, you're smoking hot. You can have whatever you want. Why would she not want dudes? Because she doesn't want dudes and she doesn't have to have them. That's kind of the evolution that I went through. I don't know if you understood that coming out of my mouth with my brain.
I think I did. I also think we're like, I feel the same way in that sense, but I also think we're not the most typical consumer of something like this.
That's entirely true, because obviously these movies are made for, we're trying to make money. We're trying to put butts in seats. I get you.
Yeah, and I also think I think if you take Marv in a vacuum, like just that story, you can go with that takeaway and it's okay and it's fine. But if you kind of take the rest of the movie, like, I don't want to say all of Frank Miller's work, but if you just look at the stories in the movie, we could talk about John Hardigan for a minute. And how old was he was an old man in the first piece of his story. He was coming onto retirement. He was done.
When he was saving Nancy as a child, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then we jump to the second
50s.
half.
Yeah.
And then we jump to the second half, which is years later. He's gotten out of jail. He's been in for how many years?
At least 10.
And okay, so that puts him in his 60s at that point.
Yep, exactly.
And then Nancy, this 19-year-old that he rescued as a small child, where does that go? Like,
he does try at one point to be like,
dissuade
are
her.
you sure you want to do this? I'm old enough to be your grandfather.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like, that line is there. That is discussed. It's glossed over, but at least it's discussed. I agree. It's weird.
It is discussed and it is disgust.
Right. But I mean, it's not that she's not consensual. And he hasn't been actively grooming her. It's just, yeah, he probably should have been more hands off, because it's obvious that she has hero worship for him.
yeah, like at the end of it all, like just the way it all came together when I looked at all of the stories in the movie put together, I just got a bunch of male power trips on this viewing. Like, it was, I can see wanting to take them and look at them in that different light and be like, well, he put these nuances on it. But when I took it as a whole, the nuances were there to justify these power trip fantasies, and it that just did not work for me in the current way I look at things in this world.
And I think, so one of my notes is that for Sin City specifically, the movie is noir. The comic book is fuckboy masturbation in black and white.
Oh,
Yes, okay. I'm okay. I'm with you.
I'll go with that. I didn't think you were just gonna fucking lay it on the table, like whip it out and lay it on the table like that. But yeah, I'll go with it.
But here is why. When I was younger, up to probably the point that, you know, my mid-20s when this came out, early 20s when this came out, I and many men like me, have the same thing. You have the daydream of the girl that you liked, a situation comes up and you save the day. You know, it's just, and I've talked to many, many men, and all of them at one point or another have had wow, if an armed gunman came in and I like jumped up and wrestled the gun away and maybe even took a shot in the shoulder, and then the girl would walk me like.
Are you talking about every libertarian fantasy ever?
Funny story. We'll get to that in a second.
You're talking about like the Joe Rogan podcast?
Yes.
Is that what we're talking about?
Yes. I mean, and it's just, I thought that like, oh man, maybe I'm the only one that has these. Apparently, most men do. But we grow out of them, you know?
Well,
most of us should grow out of
you're
them.
still a libertarian or still listening to the Joe Rogan podcast.
Yes, let's go ahead and have Graphically Novel take on Joe fucking Rogan.
Yeah, well.
And we must silence his white male voice.
It's true. He says, as millions of people listen to him every day.
Yeah.
But it's funny that you mentioned the libertarian thing because
No, I will mention the libertarian thing all the time. It's not that funny.
Due to especially Sin City, there have been interviews with Frank Miller where people have called his work conservative, and his response was and has been, "I am not conservative. I am a libertarian."
You know, I've never seen that or heard that, but
Called it. Yep. Yeah.
So he said, "I'm not stupid. I'm an idiot."
Well, this has been Graphically Novel.
Jen, are you actually like kind of proud of us at this point? Like we're 5 seasons in and we're not even like asking you anymore. We're just talking about how terrible we are as like cis white males and the shit that we have done because we're stupid. Like, how do you feel about that?
Well, I was at one point going to say, "Okay, bye. My work here is done."
No, we love you. We need to keep you here.
My planet needs me. Yeah, it's
She's the opposite of Invincibles. She's like, I'm done here. You have grown and evolved. I can move on.
so from here, from Sin City, let's move on to 300 because 300, and I'm sorry to everyone that had to deal with us throughout the entirety of the Justice League episode, but 300 was directed by Zack Snyder.
All right, but hang on.
Who I believe has an edgelord grimdark altar to Frank Miller that he must pray at nightly.
He must. Now, I get it. He actually went a little bit conservative with the movie compared to what Miller did with the comic.
Truth.
But I think as a person, as a director, if you start with 300 and then move to the goddamn black and white cut, for the love of fuck. Anyways, I think you've gotten worse as a person. Because in 300, there were women that had agency.
It's true.
And then we moved on to not.
In wiped it out, in fact.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think Sin City, a lot of the stuff in it was saved because while Frank Miller has a directing credit, he did not direct the movie. And in fact, Robert Rodriguez left the Directors Guild over his demands that Frank Miller, due to basically setting up the comic as his storyboard, he said Frank Miller should get a co-directing credit. The guild told him no. He left the guild over that so that Frank Miller could have a co-directing credit. So when you see Frank Miller directed it, he did. And I think Rodriguez, through his editing and his directing and his cinematography, softened some of those corners.
Did you say softened?
Softened.
Softened?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's
like Cool Whip?
Yes.
You're pronouncing the H, you're pronouncing the T? Softened.
I forgot he did Sin City actually.
Yeah. And I mean, looking at it, you could see Rodriguez's fingerprints all over it.
Oh yeah, except for Danny Trejo. Where was he?
Yeah, this is true.
Oh.
But then you look at 300, this is before Sucker Punch.
Yeah.
I think so.
I think he got to do Sucker Punch because the movie he made off of 300. Oh yeah, no, it was 300, then Watchmen, then Sucker Punch.
Did Sucker Punch have a comic? Because I want to talk about how I've grown as a person since I watched Sucker Punch.
No.
I shouldn't rewatch that, should I?
Oh.
No one should watch that. Stop. It should be stricken from the record.
I loved it when it came out. I'm just afraid of what would happen if I gave it another shot.
Yeah, like don't do like I'm the same way. Like I kind of want to rewatch Sucker Punch, and I'm like, I remember I used to love this fucking movie. And I watch it, like just thinking about the scenes. I'm just like, oh, there is so much baggage to unpack.
So
I
I should
know,
just
like Courtney and Kat and probably Tara and a bunch of other friends of ours will have my goddamn head if I even talk about, like, I've already said too much. Like they're gonna come for me in my sleep.
Yeah.
And
so
at
I should
least-
just listen to the
at least
soundtrack, is
one
what
of-
you're saying.
Yeah.
Yes.
At least one of them has a key to my
Yes.
heart. Oh, fuck.
Okay.
Just the soundtrack.
Okay.
Don't yeah. You're safe with the soundtrack.
I will love myself and stick with the soundtrack then.
So bagging on Snyder, we should move on to the actual movie. But
I mean, that's low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, looking at 300 though, I mean, I do believe you're right, Bear, in that he was holding back a lot of what was in the comic, because a lot of what's in the comic can be and is problematic.
I mean, there was so much that was a direct translation. There was so much that was really good. And aside from the fact that Frank Miller literally had, like, people bitched when 300 came out about the fact that it was dudes in capes and loincloths. But if they would have actually read the goddamn comic, it was literally just dudes in capes, butt-ass naked, with shields and spears.
Yeah.
And not even swords with a belt. Like, there was no belt that belt a sword on. Like, it's an upgrade from what the comic was, really.
And he actually added, Queen Gorgo having a moment where she saves herself from being sexually assaulted.
Yeah.
Like, well, we had that. We had her protecting her son. Like, of course, you're not gonna walk Lena, you're not gonna walk Cersei into a scene. This is pre-Cersei.
Yeah.
You're not gonna walk her into a scene and not let her run with it. You're not gonna let her not have agency because she's just gonna own it.
So I think at this point, it's a good idea to mention that Bear and I, right before this show, decided to turn on 300,
The sequel.
Rise of an Empire.
Oh my god.
Which is the
Why?
prequel, midquel, and sequel all in one movie
God.
to 300. And it was
Straight out of the fucking 80s, we need to make another one just to make more money.
Yeah, it was unwatchable.
And because they think that just because we made a sequel with the same name on it, we're gonna make money.
Yeah,
Oh,
it was really, really bad. And
Was it a time machine?
No, it
They
was
threw cast at it. They threw CGI at it. And it was still worse.
Yeah. And Snyder wrote it, but didn't direct it. I mean, they had, Lena Headey was back. God, who else was in that?
What's her name? Sarah did it from Penny Dreadful.
Eva Green.
Eva, sorry, my bad. Eva Green has a half-ass nude scene, super hot, but still a terrible scene. She's throughout the whole movie. There's a ton of other actors. Like, it had a really high-end cast.
Sullivan Stapleton is the main. Rodrigo Santoro comes back as Xerxes, and you get like the backstory of Xerxes.
Yeah.
And basically, it's the fight with the Greeks instead of the Spartans, except at the end, like
it mixes in the 300 fight, like the fight at the Hot Gates with the fight at the battle at Marathon, with like there's flashbacks, flash forwards, flash sideways, flash up, flash down, flash boobs, flash, like there's just flashing going on.
Yeah,
And
all over the place.
if you just want something action in the background and you don't really care about it, and occasionally you might see a hot actress's breasts, put that on, I guess, because wow.
Yeah, which
we got halfway through that movie, and I was like, "Isn't the podcast going to be in like 45 minutes? Maybe we should shut this off."
Yeah, we were both like on our phones for 20 minutes with the movie
before
on.
I said that.
Yeah.
We were talking about Stardew Valley of all things.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it's a good idea to talk about Frank Miller as a whole at this point, because I think it's pretty
as a whole, like a HOLE, like that we should kick him into.
And yell, "This is Sparta."
Bump the set.
There are things from Frank Miller that have held up. Daredevil Born Again, I'm gonna use as my example. We read it for first season. We did Daredevil. But Born Again is a great storyline. Still has some problematic bits, which we talk about if you go back to our Daredevil episode.
But that was also like an 80s comic.
Yes.
Which we all know I hate.
Sin City was an early 90s comic, so and he's also done Dark Knight Returns, which, looking at it now, also extremely problematic. He's the one that dubbed Batman the goddamn Batman. But there are things that we can enjoy.
I mean, he's done some good things, right?
Yeah. There are things that we can enjoy in our youth that we can grow out of. And I think this is one of them. I think he's important for comic book history. I don't necessarily think that he is needed any longer, if that makes sense.
How do you feel about that statement in regards to the wizard, the Grand Wizard Alan Moore?
Alan Moore has actually said less problematic things than Frank Miller has. And in fact, Alan Moore called Frank Miller out for his homophobia and racism in his books. Yeah.
Why haven't we talked about that yet on this podcast? The guy who was like spanking a British women's suffragette in
an S&M club, in
an S&M club, League of Extraordinary Gentlemen.
Yeah, I mean, we even look at like Warren Ellis has had accusations of grooming now. There are certain artists that I will say what they have contributed, outweighs their crimes. They should still be held up to their crimes. They should still be remembered for their crimes. But, you can't say that Bill Cosby's stand-up comedy was not hugely influential to stand-up comedy as a whole. You can't say that Frank Miller was not influential to comic books as a whole, but you can also say, okay, but we've moved on.
Yeah, I mean, we're also going to talk about Lovecraft. We can talk about Frank Herbert.
Yep.
I think a lot of, especially the fanboys, will always have trouble moving on, specifically from Frank Miller, because with Dark Knight Returns, he kind of heralded comics as pop culture and not just things for little kids. Like, I remember when I was a kid, Dark Knight Returns was advertised in Rolling Stone as pre-order this 4-issue thing, and it hit the mainstream for a while. And that was like the first time, other than cheesy movies, because there were not good comic book movies at that point, and kid stuff. And so people kind of hold Frank Miller up on an extra high pedestal because he's the one that they look at as, well, they made it a thing that is okay to like for a while.
Some kind of grandfather of like modern geek cinema.
Yeah.
Jenn, you've been quiet through this. Any thoughts on artists and their legacies?
Well, specifically, I'd like to point out that Frank Miller and his oeuvre is of the time that it was written. I mean, the 80s were, pretty close to the modern day pinnacle of toxic masculinity. I mean, it was, that's what it was at the time. In the 90s to a less degree, but it was still there. And then in general, I think that it's a good debate. And I think that it's really difficult to say that the product of a problematic artist should be entirely ignored. I think that there are examples that could be made where you would say, yes, absolutely, we should probably ignore this artist and their product. But part of me thinks that it's history. And if we completely negate that product, we're not learning anything to move forward and be better.
If you're always proud of the history that you've read, then you're probably not reading actual history.
Exactly.
I definitely agree with that. I think the problem only comes when you defend it in a modern stance. Like, looking back, it's incredibly important, and we should recognize that and respect it. But as long as we recognize the problematic nature now, that's fine. Like, I'm a fan of problematic favorites as long as you recognize that they don't stand up today for the perfect thing they were seen as back then.
Right.
Well, and it's real easy to point that out because it wasn't in the late 90s or early 2000s where I can't remember which one it was. It was either Burger King or Hardee's. It was like, we can do a commercial that is literally just a well-endowed woman, scantily clad, with a sprinkler all over her, getting soaking wet and nomming on a fucking thick-ass burger, and no one will have a problem with it.
That was like in the last 10 years, wasn't that?
Yeah, they brought it back a couple of times.
Yeah, they brought it.
But
the first time they did it was like, it was was like the 90s, and it's just like, okay, hypersexualized, over fantasized, selling to men, like
back in the Spike TV era.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Well, I mean,
And that's what all of this is. Right down to the suits that they had to wear for 300 so that everybody had the perfect abs. It was easier to CGI them into the movie. Like,
yeah, I mean, it's on that subject. Sin City came out under Harvey Weinstein's parents.
Ooh.
You know? So,
I didn't even think about that.
Yeah.
Reminds me of a line from H.P. Lovecraft, which is another problematic author.
yeah, well, all you need to know about H.P. Lovecraft is what he named his cat. I'm not going to say on air, but you can look it up.
I'm doing that right now.
H.P. Lovecraft was a
H.P. Lovecraft cat.
classist and racist.
Yeah.
If you weren't a at least middle class European white male, you were basically had genetic defects because of that, because of your socioeconomic status.
I have learned something today.
You learned what
know-
Lovecraft's cat's name was?
I know I like Lovecraft. I'm a huge fan of the Cthulhu mythos and what he did with that. I knew about the racism. I knew about everything else. I did not know until just now
Did you
what
know
he
how
named
bad
his
it was?
cat.
Did you know how bad it was?
I did.
The racism and the classism is really so bad, and then you learn what his cat's name was, and then you go, "Oh, maybe it was a little worse than I thought."
Yeah, I thought I knew how bad it was, and I was today years old when I learned it was worse than even what I imagined.
Yeah, I loves me some Lovecraft, but as soon as you Google what was H.P. Lovecraft's cat's name, you go, oh, and we go straight back to what Jenn said. You know, you have this author, you have you have this artist and the art that they produce, and can we separate the art from the artist?
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, H.P. Lovecraft, one of the fathers of modern horror. Stephen King calls him his inspiration.
Well, then let's hang on. Let's just go sideways for a second. If Jenn were actually here instead of on the road and listening to us in her car, she'd just be like, stay on topic, but I'm going to go sideways and go. So we take all the things we just talked about with Lovecraft, and then we go to the last like Cthulhu mythos movie that came out had goddamn Nicolas Cage as the main actor, which was
I didn't watch The Color Out of Time yet, or The Color Out of
Color Out of Space.
Which
Yeah,
And if you have followed Nicolas Cage as in the decline of his career, he's done pretty much like conspicuously Christian movies, like Revelations type stories movies, and then him doing The Color Out of Space, which is way sideways.
Nick Cage?
Yeah, Nick Cage was the Color Out of Space, which just came out.
Right. I'm talking about Christian movies, Nick Cage.
Yeah.
He's Wonderland's Nick Cage. Are you sure?
Yeah.
Mandy's Nick Cage?
Yeah, I'm not.
Like this, This Is the End. What was the other one where he was like, there was another one where he was like flying a plane or something like that, into the world, like Revelations type stuff, Nick Cage.
Oh,
he was in Left Behind.
That's what it was. Yeah.
I was just getting to that.
Yeah. I read those books. They're good.
I'm sorry.
Left Behind series that Nick Cage took on that had like one movie that didn't go anywhere, and then he moved on to Lovecraft, and sadly it did not get the viewership that I really wanted it to get because Lovecraft. But
I feel like Nick Cage follows the paycheck, not the belief.
Yeah.
You know what? And I'll go with that now because I've seen him do Lovecraft and I've seen him do Revelations, so I'm going to agree with you.
Anyway,
So do you think that the argument could be made after that foray into Lovecraft and what the goddamn fucking thing he named his goddamn cat? Do you think that I put out the argument saying that, perhaps we should look at the product and not the artist and,
Yes.
just say the artist should be removed. But do you think the argument could be made that if the artist is such a piece of crap that the product should be expunged?
No,
definitely not.
Okay, good.
Yeah, because I honestly think you have to look at them. It's an apples and oranges. Do I think Josh is the Antichrist? Yes, but has he brought enough people together to make a really good podcast? Yes.
I think you can
that did not get the reception that I wanted from anyone.
Well, because we already know he's the Antichrist. There's nothing to argue with there. I think if you're getting into comic history, you should absolutely read and know Frank Miller because of what he did Sin City was groundbreaking for its time. You should know it. Maybe watch the movie instead of read the comic, because it does the exact same thing and is a tiny bit less problematic and much prettier. Definitely don't forget him, because
I think in
then
both cases you could probably watch the movie, because Sin City was very pretty. It introduced you to a couple other storylines. The 300 movie was very pretty. It introduced you to it takes less time overall to read.
yeah, and I think they're both faithful enough to the material. You get the sense that you need to get from his stuff. I think
Well,
once you
especially
know
in-
it,
I'm gonna
I think
step
once
on
you
you.
know it, you should not go back to it. But that's my own personal take.
Yeah, you're fine. I'm going to step on you for a second. I absolutely think that with 300. I don't think that, and I'm gonna jump ahead to would you keep reading question, which I don't even think we have with 300.
Yeah, there's Xerxes,
Oh, okay.
which is what they loosely base the sequel off of.
So we didn't even talk about the actual titles of the graphic novels or anything, but there was only 5 issues in the graphic novel for 300.
Yeah.
And that completely covers the movie. And if you watch the movie, you really don't need to read the graphic novel.
It's true.
It was so close.
Except for the art. I would say the art in 300 is fantastic, which was done.
But it was so the imagery in the movie was so close to the art in the graphic novel. I think you're probably good.
Mostly-
Unless you really want to get that visual. I'm not going to deny it was amazing. I can see why the movie was so good, because the art in the graphic novel was stellar.
Mostly due to the coloring that was done by Lynn Varney, who was Frank Miller's wife at the time. I think they divorced in 2006, 2005. So yeah, she I find it funny that Sin City was never colored. I understand the noir kind of aspect to that, but he was married to a colorist, and she did do the color for 300, which then translates to the movie. I think that there is still value in, if you like Sin City the movie, checking out what they did. I'm not saying necessarily buy it. I'm saying most libraries will have it. So if you are interested in it, go and check out the source material from an artistic standpoint. Same with 300. But story, you're absolutely right. In both of those cases, the story is there.
Yeah, the story differences are so minimal in 300 between the graphic novel and the movie that, I was sitting there reading it. I was kind of enjoying it, but I was flipping through the graphic novel so fast on 300 when I was sitting at breakfast this morning that I literally breezed through 5 issues in the span of maybe 2 hours, if that. It was just so close to the original. Now, were a couple things out of sequence compared to the movie? Yes. Were a couple things, a little bit of dialogue difference? Yes. Because you're doing it for a movie audience as opposed to a comic book audience.
The gist was there.
But everything, all of the beats were so close. So close.
So there are 6 more collected of Sin City, and there is 1 more of 300. So Matt, will you continue reading either of these comics?
I did it once. I would not do it again.
All right, Jen?
I don't think so. It was fine. I appreciated being able to check it out for the show, but I don't see myself going back to that material at all now.
Fair?
Absolutely not. As a media guy, they've done all they needed to do, and I don't even want to go back, honestly, to what they've done. I mean, after I've had a few beers, is it great to have Sin City on in the background while I make Dungeons and Dragons characters, or, as I work on stuff around the house, or as I'm doing dishes? Yeah, whatever. It's a different movie to have on, but in the end, it's just I'm not going to put a lot of thought into this movie because it doesn't deserve a lot.
I appreciate the history of it. I appreciate both Sin City and 300 for what they did to the medium of graphic novels, and I appreciate the films for bringing those aspects more front and center into the culture.
I feel like I'm going to step on you. I feel like a little bit of a hypocrite because I really love the Spirit.
Yeah.
I do feel like a little bit of a hypocrite because of that. We've already done the Spirit, and I've talked about that, but...
Well, and we talked about there are problematic aspects to the Spirit.
There are tons, but
not
changed a lot.
Yeah.
We've gone from a comic that was in the 50s, that was just a strip comic in the 50s, to a movie where literally, and I had the same conversation then. It's literally we've got a black guy in a Nazi outfit,
Right.
and I want to have a conversation with him about how he felt about that.
Well, and yeah. because it was very obviously parody. It was, I mean, yeah. Oh, Samuel L. Jackson, so much love.
Samuel, we have so much love for you.
You'll always be my director, Nick Fury. But yeah, I appreciate, like I said, I appreciate the history.
Do I at least get to be your fucking Coulson?
I appreciate where it led us. I don't necessarily agree with the path that it took to get us there.
Right.
There also drives a Volkswagen.
I do drive a Beetle, and honestly, let's talk about casual racism and casual sexism. The place where I work at was just like, oh, you drive a Beetle, so you must be gay.
Wow.
Yeah.
So it's gay to own a car now?
Pretty much.
Cool. Back in my day, it was just if you listen to Coldplay. 40-year-old virgin joke.
Moving along.
All right.
We have one episode left.
Yep. Matt, thank you so much for joining us. I hope you've had a blast.
I have. I hope you'll have me back again sometime.
I hope you enjoy all of the new memes I've opened you up to, because Lovecraft Cat is a whole
Oh God,
world.
yeah. I'm gonna dive down that hole a little later here.
So please, everyone, tune in next time when we have our season 5 finale.
The finale.
The finale. When we talk about Warrior Nun, which didn't know it was a comic when it showed up on Netflix.
Weird sideways moment.
Found it, still not sure what it is, but we'll get into that in a couple of weeks. So until then, take it away, Vandello.
Come with me, I'll tell a story that you might have heard before. Graphically novel, but the same old trouble. Villains always knocking at the door. Pretty pictures on the page, but nothing ever stays the same. Do 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 do. Come at me, and I'll show you something you ain't never seen before. Right or wrong, or can't we all just get along? My mask is no different than yours. Pretty pictures on the screen, but nothing's ever as it seems. Do 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 do. Hero or villain, loved or hated by millions. Maybe it's wrong, maybe it's right, but you don't want to see my